Sweet surrender as I love, serve, and remember.
When I was at Agape, which is a community like this, but with thousands of people down in Los Angeles, and this was in the 90s, I was in what we call practitioner training. It's now, that first year is now called Advanced Consciousness Studies, but at that time it was practitioner training. And a lot of people went through these classes, so we knew the people who went before us. And you do a lot of work in this class, this first year of class. It's 30 weeks, and you're really doing a lot. So everyone looks forward to the summer. Yay! You can relax a little, and then you come back for the second year in September, and it's like you feel rejuvenated, maybe even resurrected, fresh and clean and new. So it was the end of the first year. We were all looking forward to summer. And then they came in and they said, well, we've changed the policy for your class. And it's much, you look at the people ahead of you and you just want what they have. And they said, we've decided that you have to spend, and I can't remember, I think it was like 5 hours for 3 weeks they had a prayer ministry. It was a lot, especially when you're planning on doing nothing. And Agape at that time had thousands of people, so their prayer ministry was active. So they had a special room, and you go in, and they had phones, and you'd be with other people answering calls for prayer. And I still, at this point, hadn't come out of my introverted shell, so the idea of sitting on a phone praying with strangers was horrifying to me. I just gotten used to practicing praying for my classmates. Plus, I just wanted the summer off, both. So I went in there, you did the whole training, and we went into and for those of you who are, most of you are familiar with this teaching, is we don't get lost in the problems or the suffering. The intention is always on what is true, what is God's truth in the midst of whatever the challenge is, and so we've put our attention on what we are for. We are for to know spirit in the midst of whatever's happening. So myself and the people that are around me, we're praying, and we're there for hours because we were forced to be. We even had to get someone to sign it and get it signed off and approved. There's like all this, like, check the box. Here's a task that needs to get done. But just praying hour after hour. I remember walking out of the office. It was like I was walking on light. It was amazing, and I thought, why would I not want to do this? This is awesome. It prepared me for the new life and refreshed me by praying. Praying is such a powerful, powerful force. It's that content that comes from inner awareness. Mindfulness is the witness, and there's no content to mindfulness. Mindfulness is free. And that's why people experience so much spaciousness when we practice mindfulness. That spaciousness is free of content. Prayer is full of content. And when you get those two things together, heaven on earth. So the transfiguration, of which we're talking about today, comes from the Gospels with Jesus. He, after being surrounded by people all the time, asking him and teaching and healing, he asked 3 of his disciples, Peter, James, and John, to go up to the Mount of Tabor, to go pray, to go off and pray together. Now, there's something called the Jesus Seminars, or the Red Letter Gospels. Have some of you heard of that? Yeah, well, I see heads nodding. So what that is there was a group of people who came together, and they just started going through the 3 Gospels and saying, well, all 4, but John was so different. And they decided, they just red lettered anything that was in all 3 Gospels. Because they just assume if it's in all 3 Gospels, there's more likelihood that it's true than all the variations that happen in each of the Gospels. So interestingly, the Transfiguration is in all 3 Gospels, told slightly differently, with little different nuances. But what's also interesting is it's a very short section. I'm like, oh, I love the Transfiguration, that's amazing. And then I'm reading, I'm like, didn't say much. So what this is they go up, and in Luke, the disciples fall asleep. The other people just sort of are vague about what's happening. But even when they wake up, they're they're a little disoriented about what's happening, because what happens is they see Jesus and he's completely lit up. He's all in this white, uncreated light. So not the white, they use the word white, but not the white of humanity, but a whole nother transcendent white. And he's just pure light. And with him on either side are Moses and Elijah. And in Luke, what they say is that the disciples fell asleep, and when they woke up, they heard the end of the conversation. So there's this conversation. Clearly, in all three of them, they're talking with each other. And it was in Luke, it's like it was the end of the conversation we caught. And the end of that conversation, well, we'll get to that. The point is that through prayer, through removing himself from the busyness and the intensity of life, with other people, not just by himself. I mean, we talk about Jesus as this enlightened one, but he almost always invited people to come with him when he prayed. A few people always were with him, even if they were just standing close by. So it's that two or more gathered consciousness. Even as I was talking about being in the prayer room at Agape, I wasn't in there by myself. I'm absolutely clear that the other people praying on their phone were impacting we're all impacting each other. So every time we're praying and we're around each other that are praying, we are lifting ourselves up to a higher state. And so he goes into this higher state through prayer. He touches that which is most real about him. He touches what we call, what I would say is the energy body. It's full of light. And they see it. And they're a little confused. Peter's a little confused and said, well, should I give them shelter? I said, no, we don't need shelter. When we connect with that divine presence, that transcendent presence, it is more powerful than the chairs on which we are sitting, the floor on which we're standing or sitting, the ceiling, anything that we can see or taste or touch with our senses, any human experience that we have is nothing compared to this transcendent experience, and it's available to all of us all of the time. We want to choose to experience that transcendent. And when we experience that transcendency, we're moving into a whole nother way of being, and we see with a whole new eyes. So he's in this perfection. He's just pure white, and he's perfection. So one of the ways we do this is through prayer, meditation, spiritual practices. But I'm going to really focus on prayer and meditation because those help us move into this higher state of our being. And Jesus tells us this wonderful parable, which fits so well for all of you who have ever taken foundations class, and we're explaining our little chart over there, the seed, the soil, the plant. And Jesus talks about the guy who's spreading seeds. And one, we won't go into that one, the one where the devil comes and takes it away. But there are some seeds that fall on thorns. And what he means by that is people who are not interested. There's no receptivity at all. They're very involved in this world, everything that's happening here, and they're not receptive at all to this divine energy that's wanting to reveal itself. So let's just think about seeds as that divine awakening possibility, that possibility to know our oneness and union in God. We either have no interest, like it's there, but just no interest. Our attention is fully on this world, so we're not available to it. But the one I found really interesting was the seeds that fell on rock. Because I think it's says a little bit about our world today on different levels. What he said was, and this is Jesus' explanation, not mine. I wouldn't know that it meant this if I hadn't read his explanation. I was one of his dumb disciples who needed an explanation. He says that it's for people who, the moment we hear spiritual truth, we're like, oh, I love that. And you're going along, but after a while, life, tribulations, challenges, it just sort of disappears. It doesn't last. It doesn't have the depth. It doesn't have roots. And I was thinking about that. I think what interests me is because I am one of, I know a lot of people have gotten off social media, but I have so many different people I connect with from my various lives. I like being on there. And there's a lot of people, including me, who post spiritual truths. And I'll go, yeah, that's great, that's beautiful, that's wonderful. And in some way, I'm like, I'm like a rock when I get it. Like, I like it, but it stays with me for about 2 minutes until I read the next post or the next cool quote. Like, it doesn't land really deeply inside of me. And then I was thinking about chat. What's this new thing? The robot, the chatbot. Yeah. Well, we all know what we're talking about. I heard 3 different names. I get confused. But it's that thing, you give it a couple names, and it can come up with something. And so one of my colleagues said, oh, I tried this. I'm just going to call it chatbot. I know it might not be that, but that's what I'm calling it for ease sake. He said, I put a few words from our teaching, and it came back with a prayer. Like, here's the prayer. And I thought, wow, again, the words are cool. Like, a chatbot did that, but where's the depth? Where's the roots? You can say these things pretty easily. Even a chatbot who has no idea really what it's saying, has no consciousness, can repeat back to us. So that's one level of it. But then I was thinking about another level. And this is, I'm not saying this is a true experience. I'm not saying this is truth. I'm just saying it's my experience and some thoughts that I've had. There are some, I'm just going to say the name, but I'm not trying to diminish anybody. I'm just saying a thought that I've had about it. So I really loved Eckhart Tolle when I read The Power of Now. I thought it was just so great. And as I'm reading it, and I don't know if any of you who've read it had the same experience, as you're reading it, you're just suddenly becoming more and more present, and you're feeling it, and it's great. And then when I was done with the book, about 2 months later, I'm like, what was that feeling again? Or how do I get back to there? And what I've noticed, like, he's teaching things now that we teach. Like, he's like, because I remember thinking, there's no roots there. Like, he has depth. I'm not saying he doesn't have depth, and he isn't pointing to truth. But to become a way of life, for it to become really enriched and embodied, what I was thinking is there's no tradition for that to be anchored in. There's no roots. He's got his experience, which is powerful and does change and has changed life. There's no question Eckhart Tolle has changed so many people's, or had an impact on so many people's lives. But I was also looking at the power of lineage, where we have those deep roots. There's an African proverb that said, if your roots are deep, there's no need to fear the wind. If our roots are deep, there's no need to fear the wind. I started thinking about lineages back in 2008 or 2009 because that was part of my integral training. All the learning that I was doing, Ken Wilber, who is a main articulator of integral theory, really was pounding away at this idea of the power of lineages. He said, because they're the lineages of this earth are the only things that can carry us through time, through energy. So we're not just a moment in time. We're not just connected to each other in our particular era. We have generations upon generations of people with whom we are connecting. So when we anchor in that prayer, in that wholeness, we are connecting with all the beings that have come before us and connected through prayer. And that power is extraordinary. It's something that we can't just manufacture in a moment. So yesterday, I went to Self-Realization Fellowship, which is Yogananda's organization. It's in Walnut Creek, and I did their 2.5-hour meditation. But I just loved the beginning of it. The beginning of it, they open in prayer. Mother, Father, God, beloved friend, and our teachers, Krishna, Jesus Christ, Babaji, Lahiri Mahasai, Sri Yukteswar, Paramahansa Yogananda. This whole lineage that goes back to ancient times was called forth. And there was just something for me, the moment I heard all those names in that lineage, I just could breathe. I'm like, I'm not here alone. In fact, the last meditation I went there, they talked about that. One of the brothers, before he became a monk, he was trying to do the practices that Yogananda teaches, the meditation, but he was alone by himself in his room. He's like, well, this isn't, I feel like it's by myself. But then he was reading something about, no, these teachers are with you always. So every time he sat down to meditate, he actually consciously said, oh, they're with me now. All these teachers are with me every time I meditate. And he said, my meditation suddenly got deeper and deeper because I was calling forth these spiritual beings in this lineage of which I was part, and I was no longer meditating by myself. The roots that run deep do not need to fear the wind. And then last night I went to Vespers, which is an Orthodox tradition, and on their wall are all the saints of their teaching and their religion. And I'm like, roots again. This depth of roots in our transfiguration. When we are transfigured into this light presence, when we feel it, it is not a solo job. It is not by yourself. All of us have a lineage. When we look at Jesus's transfiguration, there's Moses and Elijah. That is part of his lineage. That is part of his tradition. He wasn't by himself. He wasn't doing this on his own. He wasn't going through his ministry as a solo person, but a being who's had this long history. And Yogananda has a whole thing about reincarnation, and that it's Elisha and Elijah. I get confused between, but they changed roles. So that John the Baptist and Jesus were reincarnated Elijah and Elisha. It's interesting. I don't know about a reincarnation, but it's kind of interesting if there is. These lineages are really powerful. So we have these lineages that we feel the depth, that we're not going into these transcendent states by ourselves. We are on a journey of light and of love, and there's a reason for it. Because life is hard. What's interesting about the transfiguration versus the resurrection is in the transfiguration, Jesus is shown as pure white light and a perfect being. At the resurrection, when he comes back alive, he has lots of wounds. He has wounds on his hands and all the scar and the wound on his side. And I love, she's a rock star Lutheran minister, Nadia Webb-Borolz. Does anyone know who I'm talking about? Yes, Nadia, I can't say her whole name. Nadia, it's 3 names. She's got like tattoos all up and down her arms. She's really cool. But I love what she says. She says, Jesus didn't hide his wounds. He didn't go, oh no, I was human and I got hurt. I don't want to tell anybody when I was resurrected. I'm perfect. I'm the transfigured perfect being. I don't have wounds. And he said, no, look at my wounds. Touch them. I was human. I felt human pain and suffering. I experienced the challenges of life. What we find is that in that transfigured place, when he was in the light, the going thought is that what he was talking about with Elijah and Moses, besides, by the way, just from the Christian edition, that represents he was the fulfillment of the law, which was Moses, and the prophecy, which is Elijah. But what they were talking to him was about the time to come. He was learning about this crucifixion that he was going to go, this horrible thing that he was going to have to experience. They were preparing the way for him. This light energy is always for us and knows that we need help. They didn't just throw him into the experience and he had no idea it was coming. He could prepare his consciousness to meet that very challenge that was coming. One of the things they're saying about how America is looking, I'm sure this is all over the world, but I always feel I can't talk about what's happening in Europe or in Japan or Australia. But I can say that the statistics for America is that there's a general consensus of doom, that we are going into a very difficult time. I'm not saying whether it's true or not, but that's a general belief, and as you believe, so shall it be done. There's a general sense, or maybe we're just picking up on what's actually happening, but there's a general sense that things are going to be getting worse from a lot of people, especially our young people. They're really feeling it. How do we prepare ourselves for doom? Do we prepare ourselves for doom by focusing on, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, I can't believe this is happening? Or are we focusing on that divine perfection of who and what we are and spending time in prayer every day, being rigorous about our prayer and meditation life? What are we for? What are we for? Because what do we say? That power and that presence is more powerful than anything that is happening on this earth. Anything that's ever happened to any one of us individually or collectively, this power and that presence, when we tap into it, it's like it never happened. It did happen. He did have the scars, but it didn't own him. That was not his identity. He had the scars of being human. He felt the pain of what happened, and at the same time, he was operating from that freedom and that lightness of being. Because he may not have been able to get through that experience if he didn't have that connection with his transfigured higher self. And that's true for all of us. Whether we're going through an old pain or present pain or something that's coming up, the one thing that we can count on is our divine self that is right here and right now. We can connect with that every time we pray. There are practices. Kathy's doing a workshop next week on mindfulness meditation. Through mindfulness meditation, you can connect so quickly with this divine perfect self that you are. And when we're in that place, there's no fear. So when Jesus came down from the Mount of Tabor and he starts telling people about this thing that's going to be happening, he's not saying it with fear. He's not saying it with trepidation, because he was just in the light. He knows everything's going to be fine. It's going to be hard, but everything's going to be fine. It's only when it actually happens that he's like, maybe not. Garden of Gethsemane. And this is an interesting question for me, and something I've thought about, because one of the things that Ernest Holmes says is that there's no more need for suffering. And I remember there was a conversation that I had with my colleagues. This was years ago, on the minister's listserv about, is there no more need for suffering? And I felt that was a little bit cruel, because there is suffering on the planet. So for those of you, I'm sure most of you are familiar with, pain is inevitable, suffering is optional. And so there's the acknowledgement, yes, pain's going to happen, but the suffering is what we do with it in our mind. And there's no reason why we have to elongate that suffering. But anyone who's ever been human, so for anyone who's been human, when you have a pain, you can't just cut it off that easily. Our heart and our body feel things deeply, sometimes much more deeply than our mind does. Our mind can be free. I've always loved something Thomas More, who wrote Care of the Soul, said, that the spirit moves fast. It moves instantly. It's already done. It's the transfiguration. It's perfect. It's whole. It's complete. And he says, but the soul moves slowly. It's like molasses. It feels everything. It's that part of spirit that feels the human experience. Doesn't transcend. Well, it's in that it's both. That transcendent, but it also feels everything. And so sometimes that feeling thing makes us feel suffering. We feel a little bit despair. We can't just cut ourselves off from those feelings in our body and our heart. And so I remember having this conversation with some ministers and saying, well, does that mean you've never suffered? And they said, oh, no, since you've been in Science of Mind. And they said, no, we've suffered, but we don't have to. And so I really thought a lot about this, and I don't have a final conclusion. I do think there's value in the statement. And there's value in understanding that we might not have to suffer as long as we suffer when we know that we are pure spirit. I think we will always have suffering, but it won't become our identity. And that's the key. One of the things I've noticed about my different teachers, Shunryu Suzuki, Paramahansa Yogananda, I just was reading this in St. Porphyrios literally yesterday, and he said the exact same thing Yogananda said, Shunryu, which is, I love that my teacher was so hard on me. I wish they were harder on me. And I'm writing in the column, why would anyone want a teacher that's mean to them? I just didn't get it, wrap my head around it. But the way Shunrug's explained it, like he was a little bit sad when his parents died, but he was really sad when his teachers died, because his teacher was so focused on freeing him from his identity with suffering. And that happens in different ways. It happens different in Buddhism, and Yogananda is Hindu, and St. Porphyrios is Christian. So it happens in different ways, but it's like, focus on the love. Be rigorous. Be strong. You are going to want to go down this path. And I thought about it because I get emails from my different colleagues about what they're doing at their service. I would never be this bold, but I kind of liked it. I had a colleague who put out his message about the resurrection. And he was saying, well, first of all, the fact that God would have his only son crucified and then blame human beings for it, that's crazy. And he said the word insane. I love him because he has strong opinions. And then he said, what we have to understand is suffering is useless. And that's, if you really accept what happened with the Calvary, and I haven't heard his talk, this was just, I'm getting this from his email, but he did use the word useless, because now suffering is useless, and it's a waste of your life if you don't get on board with the resurrection. And I'm like, wow, I can't believe he just said. So he said, if you don't get on board, your life is wasted. I'm like, what? That's really harsh. Your life is wasted? Wow. But I'll tell you one thing, it got my attention. I'm like, I think I want to hear that talk later. And I will say, years ago, that would have really aggravated me. What? No. If we're suffering, my life isn't wasted. That's the harshness of the world. And that's true, too. My frustration with what he said would also be true. But today, when I read it, it made me laugh. And I'm like, well, there's kind of truth to that, too. That the more free we become, we're not so identified with the things that have hurt us as who and what we are. It's like Arjuna from the Bhagavad Gita. The whole story of the Bhagavad Gita, the whole purpose of the Bhagavad Gita is for Spirit telling Arjuna, you have to keep playing in the world. It's like Jesus being told, you got to go on this path forward. Arjuna, you got to go into the battle. You got to fight. And Arjuna's like, no, there's too much suffering. And what they were saying is, be transfigured. Know that you are the divine light, and then get back in there, because you are not going there alone. When you go into your battles and your wars, your challenges and it's all a metaphor for our challenges of life, our own interior battles and our exterior battles. That's what the whole Gita is about. Our inner war and our outer war. And we need to show up for it. It is hard and it is painful. And we do need to forgive ourselves 70 times 7. And we do need to forgive others 70 times 7. It's a constant inner warfare with wanting to be that transfigured, perfect self, and that self that has all these wounds. But we won't make the journey if we don't know who and what we are. Arjuna could not have gone back into the battle if he hadn't had that experience with the divine. If he hadn't gone away, gone onto his mountaintop, hadn't gone into his upper room, gone in and connected and was honest and just said, no, I'm done. It hurts, and I will not participate anymore. If he hadn't done that, he wouldn't have had the whole transfiguration experience. So it's not like we've failed when we just say, I can't go on. It hurts too much. Because when we start knowing our connection, we have this whole lineage behind us that is here. We're here. We're going to help you. We're supporting you. For this teaching here, New Thought. So I got this whole thing about lineage, and I was like, well, what about New Thought? What is our lineage? And so I started putting it out. There's a lot of people, colleagues who love history, and they're just going through this whole history. Our lineage is the perennial wisdom, which is ancient. It's part of the Greek philosophers. It's part of Hinduism. Like us, it is in, through, and as all these teachings, and that has been taught for thousands of years. We didn't just show up talking about the seed, soil, and plant. That's not just a new incarnation. We see Jesus talking about it thousands of years ago. We are part of an ancient history. And when we start realizing that, so when we're going into our prayer, Cher goes into her prayer after decades of praying, and she's now connecting with all the beings of the perennial philosophy that have been praying. There's a power and a force that none of us can do on our own. Jesus couldn't do it on his own. He had teachers. That's what this transfiguration offers all of us. Is this incredible freedom and light and joy and beauty and harmony and love beyond our wildest imagination when we open our heart and know who and what we are. Right before the transfiguration, Jesus said, "Who do you say that I am?" And that's a question for all of us to be asking. Who am I? Who do you say that I am? And when we pray and we pray and we pray and we connect with thousands and thousands of years of history in their prayers, we are actually showing up as this powerhouse of light and of love that is full of radiance and joy and unlimited possibilities. And it doesn't mean we don't suffer. It doesn't mean we don't have pain. It doesn't mean we aren't challenged. But it does not own us. We are free in the midst of it. We are free in the midst of it. I'm just going to end with this because it just popped in my head. I remember watching this whole thing. They have every 12 years they have a festival on the Ganges rivers in India. And they had all these different, India has a ton of gurus, so they all were coming, and they were doing crazy stuff, burying themselves alive. One of them, I won't even say, it was like way too painful. Doing crazy stuff, and they're saying, look, I'm fine. I can torture my body, and I'm fine. What they're showing to the world, what their intention is, this presence is more powerful than any pain this world can give. It doesn't mean we're still not human. We find our soul by finding our lineage. We feel our pain, but we are not owned by it. We're free. We are free. We are free, and that's what the resurrection is about. Jesus went through pain, shows his wounds, and he was utterly free. He was light. He was love. His heart was wide open. He forgave everybody. I'm free. That is our divine destiny today. Let's claim it and pray. And so even as I'm praying, as we were talking about the power of collective prayer, I want you to be less focused on what I'm saying, and I want you to be praying inside your own head. So there's a collective prayer that the spiritual energy, it doesn't need us to speak out loud, the spiritual energy hears you. So when I start praying, I'm going to invite you to start praying right along with me in your head. So there's just going to be a room full and online, on computers, wherever you are. We're going to all be praying together, okay? You with me? Yes. All right. And so we begin. I give thanks knowing that there is only one power and one presence, this beloved presence that is love itself all of the time. It has no beginning and no ending. It is full through and as all creation. It is madly in love with itself as all creation. It loves who it is at the billions and billions of stars and the grains of sand. It loves who and what I am, and it loves who and what all of us are. I am so grateful for the prayers that she is speaking here and now through all of us in this room and online. I give thanks knowing the words that are being spoken are activating this energy of who and what we really are, who and what we really are, pure beings of light and love. We all know that transfigured self. We become intimate with our true identity as spiritual beings, having a human experience. We are living that. We are practicing the presence for all eternity. We connect with our beautiful teachers, and the Greek philosophers are right here in this prayer. The incredible spiritual teachers of Jesus and Buddha and Moses and Elijah, and the Hindu gurus and teachers of the ancient scriptures until today. All of our teachers, every one of us having all of these multiple teachers and spiritual beings surrounding and folding us. Now we are with us. They are praying with us. They are holding us. They say yes. They say yes. They say yes to the fullness of our freedom and our light and our joy now, the fullness of our beauty and our abundance and our creativity and our harmony. Now they are with us saying yes, yes, this is the new life. This is heaven on earth. This is for which we were born. And we carry that energy into our life. And as the dust and the grit of the journey comes and it seems to overwhelm us, the freedom and the light and the joy are felt again and again and again and again. And we live this resurrected life as prayer, as being here, now, and always. In deep, abiding gratitude for all of these prayers that have been spoken here this morning, for the feeling, tone, and energy that we have all collectively created through and as our pure awareness of spirit, I just say thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, God. I release this word into the law of life, knowing as these words have been spoken, it is done. And so it is.
I walk in God in all I do. I walk in God in all that I say.